How do you petrify a ghost? Hey, brother! Okay, how on earth do you petrify a ghost? I'm speaking, of course, in reference to the petrification of Nearly Headless Nick in Chamber of Secrets. As a quick refresher, Chamber has a clever running gag in each of the attacks that take place in the castle, where the Basilisk is always having a near miss on actually successfully committing a murder, and instead always leaves the victim petrified. The first attack is on Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, who sees the Basilisk reflected in the water on the castle floor. Colin Creevy must have heard the Basilisk coming and had the good sense to attempt to photograph his attacker and only actually sees it through his camera's lens. Hermione eventually figures out what is causing the attacks in the castle, and her and Penelope Clearwater are both checking around corners in the castle with the usage of a hand mirror. And then, of course, Justin Finch Fletchley sees the Basilisk through Nearly Headless Nick and therefore doesn't look the King of Serpents directly in the eyes. And I've gotta say that I remember, especially as a young reader, how absolutely mind blown I eventually was when I realized that each occasion involved some small circumstance that would have otherwise obscured the victim's direct line of sight ever so subtly. And of these, I would consider the witnessing of the snake through a transparent ghost to be one of the more clever ways to have this ultimately play out. The small hang-up, though, is the incredibly obvious issue that Nearly Headless Nick is already dead, and therefore it doesn't really seem like he should have been all that able to be affected in any way by the Basilisk. Right? So how is this working? And goodness gracious, how convenient would it have been for Nick to have just remained unaffected? Just imagine everybody storming in the corridor like they always do, and they're like, Harry was just in a fight with Justin, he's totally the heir of Slytherin. And Nick is like, guys, actually it's really just like a heckin' big snake. Then Dumbledore could just phone his best friend Newt's commander and be like, hey, have you ever heard of a really, really, really big snake that causes petrification? And Newt would be like, did you just never read my book? Which, I mean, seriously, Dumbledore, process of elimination could have sorted this one out fairly quickly. It says it all right here, and first years are required to have this book, so. But you know what? That's a conversation for another day. In the meantime, I'd love to learn how or why Nick was even capable of being petrified in the first place. So today, we discuss. Hey, brother! Okay, so how do you petrify a ghost? Excellent question. Where to start? I have no idea. One thought that crossed my mind almost immediately was the curiosity of what even happens when the Basilisk does make direct eye contact with its victim. We know, because we actually read this book, and just, from Chamber of Secrets in general, that basilisks can live for hundreds and hundreds of years, making them quite the ancient creatures. So a thought that first crossed my mind was, well, if indirect contact causes no real physical harm but petrification, then maybe direct eye contact is super similar. You're unharmed in every single way, except of course for being dead. A sentiment I had to say aloud before I realized it sounded awfully familiar. A team of doctors had examined the bodies and concluded that none of the riddles had been poisoned, stabbed, shot, strangled, suffocated, or, as far as they could tell, harmed at all. In fact, the report continued in a tone of unmistakable bewilderment, the riddles all appeared to be in perfect health, apart from the fact that they were all dead. You know, of course, that is the description of the effects of the Avada Kedavra curse on Tom Riddle's family via his father's side. And because basilisks are ancient creatures that are most associated with the dark arts, is it somehow possible that the Avada Kedavra curse is somehow the distillation of the powers of the mighty basilisk and somehow then funneled into curse form? After all, the basilisk is described as, and I'm reading here, Dumbledore, brilliant green, and of course the light heavily associated with the Avada Kedavra curse is green. Pieces are coming together. But alas, earwax, no, this can't be it, because even though none of the victims of the Basilisk have endured any damage whatsoever, it's not for a lack of trying on the part of the Basilisk. Allow me to explain! Each of the attacks from the Basilisk does feature a few things in common. As we've already outlined, there's the reflection and a petrified victim, but then there's also one other kind of easily overlooked phenomenon.
Heat and laser vision.
Yeah, you didn't see that one coming, did ya? Nobody ever does. And that's how they die. I'm not joking. Here's Harry examining the scene of the attack of Mrs. Norris on Halloween. Can't hurt to have a poke around, said Harry, dropping his bag and getting to his hands and knees so that he could crawl along, searching for clues. Scorch marks, he said. Here and here. Then there's the attack on Colin Creevey that Harry is listening in on from the hospital wing. Dumbledore didn't answer. He opened the back of the camera. Good gracious, said Madame Pomfrey. A jet of steam had hissed out of the camera. Harry, 3 beds away, caught the acrid smell of burnt plastic. Melted, said Madame Pomfrey wonderingly. All melted. Y'all see what I'm getting at here? Because it doesn't stop there either. Here's Justin Finch Fletchley and Nearly Headless Nick. Justin Finch Fletchley was lying on the floor, rigid and cold, a look of shock frozen on his face, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. And that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure, the strangest sight Harry had ever seen. It was Nearly Headless Nick, no longer pearly white and transparent, but black and smoky. I mean, never mind petrifying Nick, how on earth did the Basilisk cook him? Laser vision, people. Laser vision. In fact, and to be fair, this does step outside of our usual rules of Harry Potter canon, but user Crack Pretty Obvious in our Discord server also pointed out that in the PlayStation and LEGO versions of Chamber of Secrets, both depict the Basilisk vision to be awfully heat ray-ish. Speaking of heat rays though, summer is coming, y'all, and such a perfect time to mention today's sponsor, Bespoke Post. Okay, in case y'all are unfamiliar, Bespoke Post is the curator of what they call the Box of Awesome, a monthly subscription box to a complete line of amazing goods from small businesses around the globe. They've got you covered whether you want to eat, drink, travel, or explore more awesome this season. And my personal latest box is called Outback and features what must be like the comfiest pair of shorts I've ever worn, but also somehow they feel amazingly durable at the same time. And I'll just say that this continues a long trend of me having spectacular luck with their Box of Awesome clothing, but if you're unsure where to start, simply taking their quiz at boxofawesome.com is the perfect place. Your answers help them narrow in on the best boxes for you and your lifestyle. Plus, it's totally free to sign up and you can skip or cancel a month at any time. I'm speaking from experience here. My house is legitimately packed with products from Bespoke Post. You just can't go wrong. Plus, right now, you can get a free mystery gift with your first monthly shipment when you sign up at boxofawesome.com and enter code SUPER at checkout. That's boxofawesome.com, code SUPER for a free mystery gift with your first monthly shipment. boxofawesome.com, code SUPER, link in the description down below. Back to our train of thought. What does a basilisk with laser vision have to do with the petrification of a ghost? Because regardless of how it inflicts damage, ghosts are incapable of either being or experiencing solid objects of any kind. Harry watched amazed as a ghost approached the table, crouched low, and walked through it, his mouth held wide so that it passed through one of the stinking salmon. Can you taste it if you walk through it? Harry asked him. Almost, said the ghost sadly, and he drifted away. Well, this is where I think, as is so often the case within the world of Harry Potter, we must discuss the topic of souls and existence. You know, normal light stuff.
Whoa, are you sure that's a good idea?
But in order to do that, I want to identify 3 key characteristics that I will argue are all essential for life to happen within the wizarding world. Those 3 items are 1, a container, or in nearly all cases, a body, unless you happen to be a horcrux. 2, a soul, which we know within the magical realm are absolutely entities unto themselves. And 3, what I'm going to refer to as a life force. Harry Potter, the person, for example, has all 3 of these: a human body, a soul, and a life force. The Dementor's Kiss is another very useful example because it involves removing a soul from a living person, leaving them with a container, or again, a human body, and a life force. But without the soul, they're really not up for, doing a whole lot of anything at all. Horcruxes, on the other hand, are a different 2 out of 3. They are, of course, 1, a fragment of soul, and 2, stored inside of a container which anchors it to the mortal realm, preventing someone's soul from fully crossing over into death. The Horcruxes themselves, however, do not contain a life force, which is why Riddle's diary, for example, would have to actually absorb Ginny's to come back to life. The Horcruxes from there, though, also have to be compared to Voldemort Prime himself, which is once again a different version of the 2 out of 3, because when his curse backfires at the Potters, it destroys his body, or container, meaning he is only left with his soul and a life force. But we must make absolutely crystal clear that he has specifically not died.
The count's off!
Come out, Harry. Come out and play then. It will be quick. It might even be painless. I would not know. I have never died. That particular line is oddly familiar as well when we move on to our next example, which is of course Ghost, imprints of one's former living self, and who of all people, Nearly Headless Nick actually gives us some of our most vital information. I chose to remain behind. I sometimes whether I oughtn't to have. Well, that is neither here nor there. In fact, I am neither here nor there. He gave a small sad chuckle. I know nothing of the secrets of death, Harry, for I chose my feeble imitation of life instead. Unlike Voldemort, though, Nick, under absolutely no circumstances whatsoever, can ever come back to life, meaning no life source, and he is also not inside of a container, as ghosts are not solid objects, so no container. What this means is that Nick, and really all other ghosts, are containerless and life forceless souls. So the question we must then quest to answer is, what is actually happening when the Basilisk attacks? And for that, I think we can go to a point brought about by Hermione, who is explaining the difference between the soul contained inside your person and the soul inside of a Horcrux. If I picked up a sword right now, Ron, and ran you through with it, I wouldn't damage your soul at all. Which would be a real comfort to me, I'm sure, said Ron. Harry laughed. It should be, actually, but my point is that whatever happens to your body, your soul will survive. Untouched. With the Basilisk attack, we actually know this to be true because we know one of its victims, Moaning Myrtle. And Myrtle's death clearly didn't damage her soul because she was able to return as a ghost, and it fits with what we already know about death within the wizarding world. What that means is that in the event of the Basilisk attack, it's your life force that is normally hit, and potentially also container. Can't forget about that laser vision. Maybe Myrtle was just like literally vaporized. Huh. It's literally a thought I've never considered before. So stay with me now, because this is important. What we now need is a least common denominator, meaning when petrification occurs, if a ghost is only comprised of soul and is capable of being affected, then it must mean that it is your soul that is impacted, and because a soul can't be destroyed, it also must mean that it is somehow paused? Believe it or not, this totally makes sense. Take Justin, Carlin, Hermione, and Penelope. In each instance, they are not physically damaged in any way, nor are they dead, so container and life force are both fully intact. So what we can then conclude is that petrifying a ghost is exactly the same as petrifying a person. In both instances, the same thing is being attacked: the soul. So what we can conclude is that petrifying a ghost is actually exactly the same as petrifying a person. In both instances, the same thing is being attacked, or in this case, paused: the soul. So now the really weird question, though, that we have to consider is that, like, if a ghost is only a soul, then does that mean that in a way a Dementor is like a ghost vacuum cleaner? But guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to check out our brand new podcast, Through the Gryffindor, Jay and I are doing a chapter by chapter, page by page, almost sentence by sentence comb through of the entire series, breaking down and giving all of our thoughts on just about every small granular detail inside of the entire saga. We are concluding Chamber of Secrets this upcoming weekend, so all of that is available wherever pods are cast, or you can check out this link over here. But otherwise, until next time, bye!